It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to talk about BW Offshore operations, how we operate our fleet, and then in particular today about the aging fleet in the mid or late life cycles of their life. I will talk a bit about how we do it, but also what the drivers are behind that, what the commercial drivers are there too. Because as you will see, this is actually the upside of the aging fleet is actually a very interesting upside from a business perspective, and creates an opportunity to grow the business. This is a note from our lawyers, in case there are some numbers, if that would trigger any financial decisions, and this is the disclaimer. On the content, a few slides about who we are and where we operate and the size of our operations. Then I will start with that commercial operational focus. Followed by our asset integrity management program, combined with a continuous improvement program. I will then talk about life extension projects. As you will see, we see that as an enabler to capture the value we see in the aging fleet. And I will conclude with some success drivers that we have learned and that we are implementing. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. Yeah. But okay, before we start, I want to emphasize that within BW Offshore, whatever we do, our top priority is HSSEQ, so health, safety, security, environment, and quality. And as you will also see with an aging fleet, that's of particular importance. So this is a very, it's a key element of what we're discussing today. In numbers, we have a global operations. We operate 16 FPSOs. We are a leading FPSO operator from that perspective, producing 700,000 barrels a day, and having a very high percentage of uptime, which we're very proud of. That's, of course, the uptime excluding the plant maintenance. Healthy backlog of $10 billion. We passed the $10 billion this year. And with the fleet that we have in operation, we have a total value of assets of about $3.4 billion. So this slide gives you an impression of where we operate. Historically, the business has grown a lot in the traditional areas, Brazil and West Africa. But we're also particularly proud of a couple of units here in the Gulf of Mexico. We are currently still the only operator in that area with the BW Pioneer. We use moored, it's the deepest moored FPSO in the world till today, 2,500 meter of water depth. That will be beaten by SBM and Shell with their Stones project in the near future. But so far we were proud of that record and being the first. Also Yuncap Nap, which is actually the largest FPSO by throughput, 600,000 barrels a day liquid throughput. In the Mexican part of the Gulf of Mexico. But we also have the smallest FPSO in the world, BW Athena, operating in the North Sea in a harsh environment, a very small unit, and still producing and providing the uptime as we have agreed with our client. And because this was a very small unit, the capex investment and the rates were such that this allowed the Athena field to be developed. From the aging fleet perspective, you'll see that I'll talk a lot about the West Africa area, but also Brazil. So first, a few words about the commercial and operational focus we have on our fleet. For operations, asset management is the key word. And asset management basically has three value triggers in our view. First one is growing existing contracts. So that's more or less day-to-day business, both from a commercial as an operational perspective, reducing cost and looking at upsides together with the client. The other one is life extensions or contract extensions. meaning so extensions beyond the existing contract. Often a replacement FPSOs is actually not an option commercially and capex investment wise, while keeping the unit on station, although expensive for the amount of work to do, commercially very attractive both for the client as for us. But that does require the in situ modifications, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. The other opportunity is redeployments, but redeployments is not easy, but the fact is that most of the units do have a significant residual value, pure capex in there. There is equipment, the hull has a value. The unit can still be used, but it is difficult to redeploy because often you need to relocate, and relocate means different conditions. There are very good exceptions in the FPSO industry, but in generally, this is difficult. And it is also difficult because there is a rigidity, I think, also in the industry to accept units as they are. So maybe this will change now where there's more pressure on cost and where instead of trying to match existing units to a project spec, there may be a tendency that project specs are adapted to available FPSOs and maybe not exactly meeting the functional requirements that oil companies had in mind, but still be able to develop that field a lot cheaper. But there is a value there, and it is for FPSO contractors. The challenge is to capture that value. A bit more on increasing the value of our existing contracts. It all comes down, of course, in controlling your cost and cost optimization. But equally important, or more important, is to actually be very focused on that you do get a fair compensation on the service you provide. And often the service required are beyond what the contracts really ask for. And so I think we have strengthened our awareness within the organization on that, and are better able to work with our clients to agree on fair compensation for those services. So it's actually a lot comes down to teaming up with your client, create opportunities, look at field modifications, tie-ins, contract extensions. There is a lot of win-wins while you're in operation and while you're out there for 10 years together or longer. There's a lot of win-wins to capture. And you see here in the graph how we over the years have managed to actually improve the contribution margin over the years. And this is as I said, this is an ongoing process. What you see here is the upstream capital cost index, and what you see is, and I think many of you have seen this graph often, but you see that over the last 10 years, the capital index has increased a lot to a factor of 2.5. A lot of the FPSOs that are currently in their midlife or midlife cycle, they were built here and at the cost levels in this area. And so, although we depreciate our book values, there is a huge upside. There's actually an appreciation in the assets if it is maintained properly and if you're able to extend your contracts with these units. So there is a value realization to do with life extension and redeployments, life extension, contract extensions, and redeployments. And this is actually the driver why it's so important to have a strong asset management focus on the mid and late life cycle FPSOs. First, with the redeployments, as I explained, that's a little harder, but still it's there as well. If you compare, we had a couple of redeployments in our fleet, and if you compare the book value of these units versus the MPV that we get through these redeployments, there is a gap that you leverage. On the field life extension, this gap is actually a lot more, because the field life extensions mean that we actually stay on the field, and And basically, commercially, this is a situation where although the oil production is low, with very targeted specific improvements of the unit, so with a relatively small scope, we can bring the units out for 5 or 10 years more. And this has to be compared with actually replacing values, the cost of bringing new units in. And obviously, that is a lot more expensive. But more importantly, even, you can continue to produce. The unit stays in location. So this is a clear win-win for both parties. And the examples we have, and I will talk a bit more about them in this presentation, is the West African units, where we have managed to extend a couple of times the contract for Petroleum Nautipa, the Espar Ivoiriens, and the Berge, Abo. And Abo is actually we have recently extended that again, so this graph doesn't even include that. But you see there is a big jump of how you go from your book value to a new present value of extended contracts. So, and if you expand that strategy over your whole fleet, you could argue that you actually have a potential within your assets. Like in our view, there is another $1 billion to capture if we manage our fleet properly and if we manage to extend these contracts and keep the units in operation. Of course, this is debatable what that exact figure is. We have probability scenarios, and one scenario is the unit goes to scrap. Another scenario is it will be life extended on the field while staying in production. Another scenario is redeployment with a certain probability. So you can come to different numbers. But our view is that with the fleet we have, and even without adding new contracts, there is you talk about order of magnitude of $1 billion that you can actually capture by managing your fleet properly, both commercially and operationally, in view of staying in production. So what this requires is a long-term approach to new investments. First of all, the whole risk-reward balance needs to be always right, because otherwise you sit for a very long period with a very wrong contract, and that will hurt you even more. So that's where it starts. But the focus is really on asset value, and taking into account a 20 to 30 year life cycle with a view on future redeployments, and also taking into account probability of these life extensions. And actually, if you talk about probability, where redeployment has a limited success rate, if you look industry-wide, contract extensions, so the options that in the contract are executed and even new years added there, has a very high probability. So there's a lot to gain. And in simple word, our goal is simply long-term asset utilization. That's the key word of this presentation. A bit more then on how are we doing this and where are we doing this. Here you see the same global footprint, but now with the units identified that where we have either a life extension project going on, or we're undertaking significant modifications. And in both cases, they are such that we define them as a project and that they extend, I would say, the normal operation of the operational crew. So we really bring in another team on board to execute this work. Clearly, West Africa, we have all units are currently undergoing life extension projects, and the duration of these projects are easily 3, 4, 5 years. But we have also done in the past work in Brazil, and even on Pioneer we have started now with life extension or preparing for life extension projects. So it's I think the message here is this is key of our whole operational approach. And I think somebody said it earlier today, life extension almost starts at day one. You need to continually look at work you can do, upgrades you can do, either driven by the client or proactively by ourselves to keep the unit in operation and to capture future value. This slide gives you not only a view on our current contracts, which is the light green, and the option periods in the contract, which is the different green to the right. But it also shows you actually the history of the tankers. And I know the years are difficult to read, but these are the older units, tankers from 76. This is our new build project Catcher that we contracted spring last year. But what you see is there is already a long life prior to the last dry docking and when these units go in operation. And still we see, we have many years to go, and we keep adding here. And so these yellow ones are the ones that currently undergoing life extension projects. And even though these tankers are out of 1976, we are very confident that we can bring this on a lot longer. With the proper investment, with the proper time duration, and with the proper skill sets to do this. And I will come back to those challenges that you'll have when you do this a bit later. What has to be said actually is that although it looks impressive or maybe scary that we talk about tankers from 1976, many of you will acknowledge that the tankers built in those years are actually fantastic candidates for life extension because they were built in a lot more conservative way, I would say, with steel thicknesses and fatigue details than the newer tankers. So sometimes you have actually more challenges with extending the life of these than for these tankers. Of course, things like accommodation standards, control systems, all that, those are already obsolete, and they will all be replaced or have already been replaced either here or will be during this period. But I think the message here is possible. This is already, all those units are almost, no, not all, but you could say half of them are already beyond their original tanker design life. But we can still keep it going as long as you keep investing. A bit more on the asset integrity management program. There is a couple of stones that lay the foundation for that. It's all related on gathering data and monitoring. So I will not spend too much time on each of them, but so there is risk-based inspection programs, a surface inspection program, UL, so underwater inspection in lieu of dry docking, mooring surveys, production rotation surveys, condition monitoring program, and last but certainly not least is the plant maintenance, the computerized maintenance management system. So that's the plant maintenance system where you plan all your jobs well ahead and monitor it and get reports on how you're doing this. But this is basically one big data gathering machine which you carry with your vessel and which you'll use during the life of the vessel, and which will be the basis of the decision for life extension and estimates of investments. The other key program as a basis, or I would say as an underlying data gathering program, is the continuous improvement program, which we implement across the fleet as appropriate. It consists of many elements: databases, incident reports, management of change procedures, shutdown breakdown reports, technical and HSE alerts, work order history. But it all comes down to, again, this is all about data gathering and monitoring what's happening. Also, the maintenance management system, we have a continuous improvement process around that with yearly workshops where we evaluate what we actually have been doing, what we have been doing against plan, whether we should change intervals or not, or add new jobs to the list. All from a monitoring perspective of how is the unit doing and what do we have in our systems. And then based on those workshops about maintenance management systems improvements, there's also the spare part review as a supporting element of that. As I said, that's all data gathering, and those data gatherings, those are the basis for a proper preparation for a life extension project. But in the end of the day, a life extension project is just like any other project. It's all about front loading. It's all about definition. It's all about understanding your scope, then being able to break it down, schedule it, estimate it, and then execute it. And you have to realize this is offshore construction work. So the execution is very different than an onshore construction job. But the preparation, instead of understanding scope, schedule, and budget, is still the I would say the key success factor or fail factor, as we have seen often in projects. But the element that is added, of course, is the data collection offshore. I talked a bit about data collection onshore. Method statements are based on previous projects experience, but the data collection offshore is a key part of this, which cannot be underestimated. And here you talk easily about if you want to do it properly, you don't talk about a few weeks, a couple of people, but you talk about months, I would say 6 months, and sometimes even to a year preparation of really understanding what are we going to do, what is the condition of what we need to touch, and what are we going to do and how are we going to do this. And after that, it is basically a project. It has a project execution plan, etc. Then you start executing. For that matter, we also have what we call the BW modification projects. It's actually modification and life extension projects group, and they're part of project execution. So they're not part of fleet. It is recognized that this is a project, and the practices and systems and procedures we have for project execution needs to be implemented equally here. So this is not something you can expect that the crew, the offshore crew, will do in addition to their jobs running the operation of the FPSO safely. So you go to the same things: project execution, engineering, project services, HSEQ, etc. I will run you now through an example. You saw there was we have 5 units having life extension projects. I just picked one, and it is more to give you just a flavor of what kind of work do we do here. Some key figures and a lot of pictures just to give you an impression. So first, historic review. Sendeberge was deployed in 2005 for the Okwori field in Nigeria. Client ADEX, and originally had a 4+4 year contract program. The good thing with Sendeberge was that already in 2009 we started with the life extension activities during the first option period, and we're still doing it today. So the first, so then there was another 4 years extension, and then in 2014, so actually last year, we had another 4+2 years contract. So now we're going on 6 years. To get an idea of the revenues the unit has created for our clients, it's produced more than 100 million barrels. And again, you'll see how expensive life extension in situ is, but we have to bear in mind where everybody gains is that the production keeps going. And even if you only produce 10,000 barrels a day, and even with today's oil price, that's still a lot of money per day in relation to a construction investment you would do to keep a vessel in operation. Well, I won't go through all the bullets. This is just a download of the key elements of this particular vessel, what we had to do. But what I think interesting to realize is that it all starts with POB and the accommodation, because you need to be able to bring on a project team, and that directly starts to affect POB. And often, I think in most of the facilities there is POB constraints, because by the time we go to the first contract, nobody wants to, nor our client, nor we wants to invest in POB. And I think slowly we're learning by, now increasing POB already from the beginning, because this is an expensive upgrade in a way. POB increase is an expensive update that you kind of know it's coming anyhow. But of course, this is a joint decision that needs to be taken already in the tender phase of the first contract. But anyhow, we need to have more people on board, so you get new cabins, and then new lifeboats, and so then you get our new certification for a new POB. But then, of course, also all the utilities supporting the accommodation, including the galley, everything needs to be upgraded for that POB. So that's a whole kind of, I would say, cycle that you need to go through before you can actually really start to work, because that is the time that you can really increase your POB and start to work on all the other activities. So that's always the first hurdle to take. Then there was, we have a new emergency generator. It's also the main boiler, the power generation system had to be attached. A lot is around the safety systems, and then steel. Here you see some pictures where we lift the new emergency generator on board. Here are some upgrades on ESD valves on the top sides. So, as I said, this is an offshore construction project, so you need to have a proper offshore team on board. And so a typical organization is some offshore management with the site manager and supervisors, and then the workforce. You see we have a lot of local content here as well. And the team is about 50 persons. And that is about, it can be 60, it can be 40, but that's a bit about of the size that we are comfortable to manage in addition to the POB we already have. Because you have to realize that by just adding more people and construction work on board on the live facility require a lot of thinking and require a lot of planning and having a very solid PTW system, permit to work system, to keep that safely. And there is a limit of how far you can go with adding more people and more activities on board. But this is why we need this accommodation to be upgraded. And actually more clever contracting strategies would be that today when you start an FPSO, understanding for both parties the upside of keeping the unit going, that the specifications for POB are much higher already at the start, because we could have had that accommodation and that size, of course, 10 years ago already, and then we just had to upgrade a little bit. Now we really have to add, including the utility system. Just high level, the operational HSE challenges. I talked already about the POB and then the simultaneous operations. So that puts a lot of pressure on a very, implement a very rigid permit to work system. You have things like tank access, and that's also directly gives an indication of how long it takes to do things. Just to be able to go into a tank, all the steps you need to do with emptying, venting, before you can actually have access, and then rescheduling your operations for adjacent tanks, etc. That takes a lot of time just to be able to go in. We haven't even done the work. So when you talk life extension projects, you really need to have a total different time frame in mind than with any other job or comparable job you would do onshore. And you have to do this very careful. So also rush is not a good practice to do this. So you really need to allow time for these projects. Then, of course, you have disruptions, like every time there's an offloading would stop the hot work, and so that creates further delays. But also often we are dependent on our clients with logistics. You need a lot more supply boats, supplying materials. You saw the picture of a emergency generator being lifted on board. I mean, so then those are big operations, and there is also still the production that needs to go on and needs to be increased often. So client wants to have time to do other activities that drives the production, and which is of course also our interest. So that slows down the process as well. Then just I will go a bit quicker because we don't have too much time anymore, and this is just to get impressions. But so this corrosion findings, you've almost found them all over the place. A bit more illustrative pictures. So yes, there is areas that because these tankers are getting old, and there is areas that face problems. And often because of the uncertainty of what's going to happen with the unit, certain jobs, if not required at that particular moment, are delayed for the time you go actually back to dry dock, where you can do it a lot simpler. Well, then if it's still a decision to go for life extension, you actually have to do a lot more work. So proper planning, again, jointly with the client on timely start of these, will avoid a lot of work offshore. Here you see. But in terms of repair methods of the steel, I think we use the whole suite of possibilities. So both cropping and renewing, but also doubler plates, coffer dams, sandwich solutions. We have replaced complete parts of the deck with sandwich plating or carbon fiber if applicable. So basically, whatever is available, we actually do offshore. This is another unit as per Ivorian. This is just to give you a flavor of what you can achieve. So you see from hydrojetting towards coating and how it looks after that, and you know, you can systematically go through all the tanks one by one and to achieve this result. In Berg-Helene, we had a particular problem, and I just want to show the pictures because it's, at least for me, so spectacular in a negative way. But in West Africa, we're facing problems with bacteria and bacteria-induced corrosions, which creates very aggressive corrosion that eats completely away steel plating. But even here, we managed to not go to dry dock, but to step-by-step replace it all. And so you see here the new stiffeners, and ultimately, you know, you see here how things can be put back in shape again. So basically, we can, from our perspective, we have solutions for all the challenges. On Berg-Helene, we replaced almost 300 tons of steel. This is at a very high cost, and it takes a lot of time. But again, bear in mind, we still continue to produce, and this is what is why it's easy for the client to justify those costs at the moment. If you look at cost, so at the time of conversion, you know, the blasting cost us about 100,000, and the same job cost you 400,000 offshore. But even more, I think, impressive. You know, this tons or dollar per ton on steel replacement goes almost up by a factor of 10. So this is expensive, and therefore, you know, you can actually optimize a lot by proper planning, commercially planning together with the client on your contracting strategy. So summary, from our perspective, life extension with aging FPSOs are actually a win-win opportunity. Most of all because there is no disruption of production and revenues for both parties. It captures most efficiently the residual value in the asset, because there is. There is a driver where the units are actually financially appreciated rather than depreciated because of the cost of replacement units. So that sets actually a true market value of the unit. There is a phased investment, which improves the NPV over the field life, meaning you could decide with your contracting strategy as a client to go for shorter design lives, but decide on timely extending the options and then do the rest of the work offshore. But again, the more timely you do it, the better you can keep the unit in a shape without delaying jobs for the next dry docking, because you know that there will not be the next dry docking, so you do it now. And it is also a way of actually also going around a lot of local content requirements which you would have if you would have to bring in a new vessel into an area where there is a lot of local content requirement. And that justifies the high cost. The typical range we see is $100 to $200 million of investments that we need to do to bring a unit out for another 6 to 10 years. The duration is typically 3 to 4 years. And again, these cost 100 to 200 million. That's like 5 to sometimes 10 times more than what the same scope would cost you in a repair yard. But nevertheless, it brings you many years out. And of course, it requires specific expertise and experience, and this is also why we try to leverage now by doing many of those projects and continue to do so, where we can implement those lessons learned and get the experience back into the new projects. Success drivers, to conclude. We think offshore modification and life extension projects are enablers to capture this value that you have in your aging fleet, particularly with increasing capital cost as we saw in the past. But where you can drive success is, first of all, with the quality of the conversion in the first place, a proper asset integrity management program and plant maintenance management program, and also very important to actually have a very detailed scope definition based on offshore construction experience. And then commercially and contractually, as to conclude, what helps is reimbursable O&M rates, because that creates much more an alignment with the client on where to invest in and how to invest in maintenance of the unit in view of extending beyond the current contract. Design life strategy, thinking about the investments after the design life is expired early. And also, from a contracting perspective, the earlier you can agree on extending the contract, the better. So don't wait till kind of the last year or the last 6 months or even the last 2 years. But even if you have a 10-year fixed term, there is a clear benefit to already after 6 years have a view and say, let's go on for another 5 years beyond the 10 years. So for sure not. What is still happening is a lot of sequential 1-year extension. That's basically just creating a lose-lose, and that will not bring vessels out to a next life. I want to conclude with that. Any questions?
Marco, thank you very much. Thank you. We have time for a couple of questions for Marco. Yeah.
Very interesting presentation.
Can you, sorry, Chris, can you wait for the microphone just so everybody else can hear over the back?
Thank you. Chris Peterson from Gianti. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. Just out of interest, you mentioned bacterial attack. Do you have any evidence that it is indeed based on bacteria as opposed to corrosion that is inexplicable, perhaps?
Yeah.
Have you ever had any evidence?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we have it on several units, and in each case we take samples that we bring to laboratories in Norway, SINTEF, and they actually analyze which bacteria, where they are. So, for instance, in Senderberg, they were actually in the produced water, so they came actually through the well in our system, and then ended up in a produced water tank. And so, in that particular tank, we had all those corrosions, and in the other tanks, we had kind of normal corrosion. But this bacteria-induced corrosion is tremendously aggressive. It's actually unbelievable. It's kind of a disease. It eats away the steel, so it has a very different pattern also as the normal corrosion.
Yeah, I have seen the results of it, but I haven't seen any tests to prove that the bacteria was actually captured in the laboratory. But you have done.
Yeah, we have on several vessels, and we also work with DNV on that. And so that's actually a West Africa operational problem that is not necessarily related to this presentation, although it does create the kind of problems that it is a challenge to solve them offshore, but you can. And you use the kind of same skill set that you do with life extension projects.
You also get H2S with it.
Yeah. That's right. So these bacteria, there are certain drivers where this bacteria flourish, and H2S is one.
Okay, thank you. And yes, at the back. Sorry, can you introduce yourself, please? So, yeah.
Rosali from MIC Kuala Lumpur. The extension on the deck is okay, but how about the mooring and the riser?
Yeah, I didn't mention mooring specifically. But we had also on Senderberger, we replaced part of the mooring. On Abo, we are actually replacing the mooring. On Aspar, we had this bacteria, and often it's actually these mooring chains are also affected by it. It's not just corrosion, but it's actually bacteria-induced pittings. Moorings, and also the design level of mooring systems are sometimes just exhausted, and then you need to replace. But replacing the mooring system is actually, in view of things we do, is relatively easy.
Okay, one more question here. Yeah.
Sami Harder with Fracture Technologies. Thank you, very, very interesting presentation. I have two questions, but I'll combine them into one. The tankers you referred to from 1976, are they double hull tankers? And do you also, when you upgrade, do you observe the changes in the HSC rules over time? Maybe in the North Sea rather than other parts of the world?
Yeah, first question is easy. The tankers at 76 are all single hull. What we do in certain cases, when there would be a requirement for double hull, a lot of these tankers are so big, and if you go to late stages of the field, the production has reduced a lot. So in some cases, we agree with our clients to, if the double hull criteria is important for them, to not use the wing tanks. So to just do the storage on the, because the parcels you offload in West Africa are typically 400,000 or 500,000 barrels a day. When you go to these mature or end-of-life fields, the production drops to 20,000 or 10,000. So actually, and that is another factor that enables these life extension projects. As the production go lower, but still high enough to generate or justify the investment, you actually have a lot more flexibility to do your work because you don't use your facility to the full extent anymore. And on HSE, I think HSE regulations change over time. And when we execute a life extension project, we'll need to comply with the HSE regulations at the particular time we execute it. But we're not forced to kind of change the overall design back to, that wouldn't be an unfair requirement. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Marco, thank you again for your very interesting presentation. Thanks very much indeed.